All right, Juice HACCP. Let's take a look at these hazards: biological, chemical, and physical hazards. David Rossen here, lead trainer, International HACCP Alliance. Let's get this going.
Objectives. In this module, you will learn to develop awareness of biological hazards, chemical hazards, physical hazards, and the characteristics of certain microorganisms. So what is a hazard? Let's take a look at the definition. A hazard is a biological, chemical, or physical agent that is reasonably likely to cause illness or injury, and worst case scenario, death in the absence of its control. This may alarm you, but in HACCP, a hazard does not refer to undesirable conditions. Some examples given would be violations of regulatory standards not directly related to food safety, such as spoilage, economic fraud, or standards of identity, or inadvertent but tolerable levels of contamination. Some more examples would be insects, hair, filth. These are not defined as hazards in HACCP. These should be controlled by good manufacturing practices and prerequisite programs like standard operating procedures with regard to sanitation. When we talk about biological hazards, some are good, some are bad. Microorganisms can be beneficial, even essential, but some can be pathogenic. These concern food processors and public health officials. Just like us, microorganisms need certain things to grow. So what do microorganisms need? They need food, they need water, they need the proper temperature. Some thrive in no air, some thrive with air, and some thrive with minimal air. Proper acidity matters, as well as cumulative time or time temperature exposures. Bacteria reproduce by dividing in two. Some bacteria double every 8 minutes. One bacterium can multiply to more than 16 million in 8 hours. When you're dealing with microorganisms, there's many things to consider. Some microorganisms form byproducts, like yeast, used to produce carbon dioxide and or alcohol, useful for making bread or alcoholic beverages. Lactic acid bacteria produces lactic acid in making yogurt and cheese and fermenting meat products. Staphylococcus aureus, however, produces a toxin called enterotoxin, which could cause illness. Have you ever opened a spoiled product or tasted a spoiled food item? Did you know most spoiled foods do not present a health risk? And not all food appears normal is safe to consume either. Make sure you keep that in mind. I said most spoiled food will not cause illness or injury, but some byproducts produced by spoilage are toxic. Food spoilage or decomposition that can result in a food safety problem should be prevented or controlled by a HACCP program. Remember, one bad apple can spoil the bunch. Apples can produce a chemical hazard called patulin. Microbiological hazards or biological hazards include bacteria, viruses, and protozoa or parasites. Pathogenic bacteria can cause illness, injury, or worst case scenario, death. Some of the most common are listed below. Let's take a look. Bacillus cereus, commonly found in rice, grains, and pasta. Campylobacter jejuni, common in chicken intestines or intestines of animals. Clostridium perfringens, common in beef, chicken, or cooked foods that are improperly cooled or handled post-lethality. Clostridium botulinum is a problem in reduced oxygen packaged foods or canned goods. pathogenic E. coli or E. coli 0157H7, common in beef products and produce. Listeria monocytogenes is an environmental pathogen, could be anywhere. Salmonella, there's about 2,700 species, another environmental pathogen, but very common in eggs and chicken. Shigella, or causes the illness shigellosis, which I like to say is the grossest, common in human fecal material. Staphylococcus aureus, humans are carriers and can also be found in the hide and skin of animals. And we have Vibrio perihemolyticus, Vibrio vulnificus, found in the ocean or murky salty water. And Yersinia has been isolated in rat intestines, fish intestines, and can be found in processing facilities. Did you know that your saliva has an antimicrobial material? And that your stomach has gastric acid or hydrochloric acid with a pH of 1 to 2? These can be barriers for infectious pathogens, but if we eat too much of a live pathogen, they can grow in our body and cause an infection. Foodborne illnesses are caused by bacterial pathogens, remember that. If you eat too much of a preformed toxin and it is swallowed, it can cause intoxication. It's important we understand the characteristics of bacteria. Some bacteria have the ability to survive extreme temperatures, dry conditions. Those are known as spore-forming bacteria. These bacteria have been known to survive in boiling water for up to 10 hours. Clostridium botulinum does impact the juice industry. If your products have a pH of 4.6 or above, you may want to make sure you're considering Clostridium botulinum. It's a spore-forming bacteria that produces one of the most deadly known toxins to man. Clostridium perfringens is another spore-forming bacteria, very common with cooked foods that are improperly handled post-lethality. And Bacillus cereus, common in rice, grains, and pasta, also has the ability to survive extreme conditions or cooking temperatures by producing a spore. Non-spore forming bacteria are easier to destroy, but can be problems in juices with pH below 4.6. In the juice industry, if your products are below 4.6, make sure you're considering non-spore forming bacteria like E. coli, Salmonella, and Listeria. Others that are non-spore forming are Campylobacter jejuni, Shigella, and Staphylococcus aureus. These aren't as rigorous or tough as spore-forming bacteria, which means they're easier to destroy. Bacteria. Please be sure to read all the attachments for this chapter. I've included technical documents on bacterial growth and inactivation, covering topics like limiting conditions for pathogen growth, time temperature guidance, inactivation of Listeria, and inactivation of C. botulinum. That's all you get on bacterial hazards. Make sure you read the Bad Bug book. I've attached it in this chapter as well. We're moving on to viral hazards. What are viruses? Where do they come from? How can they reproduce? How can they be controlled? And what are some examples? Let's take a look. Viruses can be found in people who were previously infected but are no longer ill. Viruses can also be present in people who show no outward signs of illness. Those people are called carriers. Transmission of viruses to foods is usually related to poor personal hygiene. People who have viruses shed the virus particles in their feces. Some of the main viruses of concern are hepatitis A, norovirus or aka Norwalk virus group, and rotavirus. Food handlers with viruses can transmit them to food if they forget to properly wash and sanitize their hands. This route can also result in the contamination of food with other bacterial hazards. Viruses need a suitable host in which to grow. They do not require food, air, water to survive. They are spread via poor personal hygiene, the fecal-oral route. Viruses infect living cells in our body. Viruses are very species-specific. They reproduce again inside our body in these living cells. They do not cause spoilage. They can survive in our intestines for months and on surface water for up to 2 years. They are very heat resistant. Parasites are organisms that need a host to survive, living on or within it. Thousands of kinds of parasites exist in the world, but only about 20% can be found in food or water, and less than 100 types are known to infect people through consumption of contaminated food or water. There are 2 types of parasites that can infect people through food or water: protozoa or parasitic worms. Protozoa are single-cell animals, and most cannot be seen without a microscope. Some common parasitic protozoa are Cryptosporidium, Cyclospora, Entamoeba, and Giardia. Some parasites may be transmitted through food or water that is contaminated by fecal material shed by infected hosts. Methods of preventing transmission of parasites to food by fecal contamination include good personal hygiene practices by food handlers, elimination of insufficiently treated animal waste or fertilized crops, and proper sewage and water treatment. Consumer exposure to parasites depends on food selection, cultural habits, and preparation methodologies. Most parasites do not harm humans, but may be aesthetically unpleasant. Parasitic infections are normally associated with raw or undercooked food, because thorough cooking of foods eliminates all foodborne parasites. In specific instances, freezing can be used to destroy parasites in food. However, consuming raw foods containing infective parasites can pose a hazard. Some parasitic worms include roundworm and tapeworms. Well, there's so much more to learn about biological hazards like bacteria, viruses, and parasites, but we got to move on. Let's move to chemical hazards. Some of them occur naturally, like allergens and mold toxins, and some components of plants are toxic too. Other chemical hazards include intentionally added chemicals, such as food additives. Make sure you're following the allowable limits under GMPs for preservatives such as sodium benzoate and sulfiting agents. When using nutritional additives like calcium or niacin, make sure that we have controls with the formulation step. And for color additives like yellow number 5, make sure proper labeling. As a juice processor, you have to think about intentionally added ingredients or additives like indirect ones from packing materials. Make sure that you're in compliance with 21 CFR Part 177. And other processing aids like lubricants or sanitizers. Those should be food grade, following the manufacturer's recommendation, being sure to have the material safety data sheets or safety data sheets available at all times. As a juice processor, you even have to consider unintentional or incidental chemical contaminants like agricultural chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and fertilizers, and other chemical residues. Make sure that you're considering prohibited substances under 21 CFR 189 and toxic metals or toxic elements and compounds like lead, tin, copper, pewter, zinc, arsenic, mercury, and cyanide. Other unintentional or incidental chemicals contaminants include allergen or cross contact from other food allergens from inadequately cleaned or shared processing equipment, processing plant chemicals such as lubricants, cleaners, and sanitizers. Not only do we have to consider chemical and biological, but we have to consider physical hazards as well. A physical hazard is defined as any potentially harmful extraneous matter not normally found in food. Items like glass, wood, stones, metal, and plastic meet that definition. There's so much to learn about biological, chemical, and physical hazards. Be sure to identify all biological, chemical, and physical hazards associated with your product and process. Secondly, begin identifying controls. There is a dedicated section in the FDA JUICE HACCP Hazards and Controls Guidance. I've attached a copy for your review. This concludes Chapter 2. Please complete the following quiz. You must achieve 75% to go on to the next chapter. Be sure to review all attachments for this chapter.